attention for the details should not stop the direction of the line, but how do you think when you play? And I suggest to always think the direction of the line by the harmonic rhythm, bar, half bar, quarter bar, count in the beats for the details. Don't panic the thirds, because they don't come as an upbeat. Therefore the theme starts always on the downbeat. And the second theme is not the first slower, different character, but Haydn taught him that you have to have a fake second theme, which is the bridge. In fact, that brings you by tenderness to the character difference of the second theme. And because arpeggios are, of course, broken chords, you don't want to play a harmony, since thematic material is a melodic leitmotif or possibly some pattern. So you would not want to put pedal that becomes a chord. But to hear the leaps, the 6th, the 7th, the 5th, the dominant, the tonic, the octave, all these elements which are basic, but they are part of the character difference between and the... And inside all these facts, because they're written out, 16th notes, 8th notes, and all you have to do is recite it, of course. But then in between the sounds, you have that breath or that surprise of a given modulation, like at the end with the flat 6. You're not supposed to. You expect rather a minor chord in the 6th degree being enough of a delay of the coda to the tonic, because it is the point when you do a deceptive cadence to delay the arrival. But when you do flat 6 as a degree in C major, is the appoggiatura to the dominant. So again, this is architectural points of view. In the large scope of the vision of the piece, because a sonata is a form that you play, besides the fact that inside the form you have characteristic themes, inside which you have articulations. If it's orchestrated, you might not have the same instruments playing tigga-digga pum pum pum, but perhaps tigga-digga pum 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 pum, tigga-digga dum pum pum pum. So you could have a combination of winds and strings, which means that the slur, which pianists do naturally because we play as pianists all the parts, should be tigga-digga-pop-pop-pum. Now, it doesn't mean that it has to have a hiccup, exaggerated interaction, or distortion of the line's direction, because after all it's only, but in the development, it's not tigga-digga-dum pum, tigga-digga-dum pum, tigga-digga-dum pum pum, it's tigga-digga tigga-digga and then yappa 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 pum. So orchestral. And in the third movement, you also have this slur of 3, and separately, it's not like in the first concerto. Sorry for the bass note. It's not, nor is it. It's and you can argue acoustics, instrument, pedal might overwhelm that separation that is so brief. Be it you imprint your articulation of each syllable and make sense through words in a sentence, and if you pronounce them in a church acoustic, or you pronounce them in a theater for the word to be projected to the detail, then the acoustic takes care of it. But your intention between your feet and your fingers should be imprinting the character. Speaking of character, when you have a quality of staccato, like for instance, we assume that because it's an episode, bridge, going from one section to another, that of course we don't want to make it more important than it is in terms of detail, but you still have harmonizations that colorize it. A minor, the relative, G minor, the dominant but in minor, and then finally a major triad, and this time is 5 of 5. So you cannot say that is the same, and therefore the articulation of the accompaniment, which is very purposely banal, I think should be a different quality of staccato. The problem with the staccato is that it's not just a short value. It is short value that carries inside itself a character of something comical. And if you do a wet staccato, almost tenuto, it can be just interrupted quarter notes, some kind of connected through the breath, but interrupted for the voice. And compared to, so you can implement a staccato that is shorter in major, in minor. Not by much. If it's too much, it becomes distractive. If it's something like he does, the conclusion is, we call it an escaped. It's almost like an arpeggio glissando. Or in the Waldstein. But here he does a septolet of 3 plus 4, but written exactly in the rhythm. So you don't want to subarticulate them too much in once. So that's a contradictory. I want to subdivide the articulation of where the slur ends and where the staccato starts, and what kind of staccato starts. And here I would imagine that it's my freedom as a performer and my ethical right as a teacher to suggest, to think of it as an accelerando, quarter, 8th note in triplet, 16th note as one group. But he does at the end of it an escaped, so that means the melody last notes drops. And when he has the return to the recap for the... he writes it without rhythm. Just small notes, a gruppetto, a glissando really. Or a chromatic glissando, but unmeasured. And I think that if one arrives, then one starts here by slurring the end and then start. And it's not obvious to make a bridge chromatically dropping by semi-steps in unmeasured quick notes, for once not an escaped, but really leading to the restart of the first theme, which I remind us is a downbeat. So why make a bridge to a downbeat theme? It's almost like building a bridge between two areas and, let's say, a river, and then you let the last step empty. We could drop, or you can just jump one step to arrive on the other shore. I think that's perhaps why he didn't write it rhythmically, with a certain articulation like triplet and 4. And here, also rhythmically. rhythmically, but he didn't. And so the notation gives us a little bit of room, just like in the conclusion. The trill being for a tender sforzando, but the arrival third dropping is not a hiccup, it's not an accent, it's a natural drop of the arpeggiated version of the diminished triad of the dominant. And then the tonic. For this arrival on the tonic, of course, is the dominant of overall. But overall is dominant, and at that point is its own tonic. And the broken octave is to show a lot of driven, I would say, motoric development, because when he has immediately after that super amount of 16th notes, but they stay statically because there are 8 beats on 2 bars of 4/4 for each harmony. So the harmony is very slowly stagnant, and at the moment of return on D major, the dominant of the dominant, he changes in each quarter note the harmony, as if speed bump driving to slow down from the excitement of those 8 beats of harmony in one pedal. As a calming down, cooling down, merging in traffic and getting back into original tempo, but not under nor above, but allowing a little bit of excitement to build up, because that's what it is about. You don't want to do always an accelerando in crescendo, but you want to be driven, like at the ending of the exposition of the first theme, before the fake second theme, the lured second theme, and then the tender bridge to bring it to the real second theme. It's like being in a country that you know, there's the mountains, the rivers, and then in between the climate changes, and you prepare, you anticipate, and sometimes you prepare and you don't want to too much anticipate because you want to be a surprise for the flat 6 at the end. All these thought processes are partly analytical, but mostly intuitive. He didn't know how to call the deceptive cadence. Well, it doesn't matter really. It matters if you write an essay, but if you play it, you feel that it's a delayed rather conclusion. So knowing is not instead of feeling, and feeling is not knowing less. It's just feeling, guessing. But when you observe the score, since it's not oral transmission, thankfully, we have some details. I give an example. At the end of the first exposition, 3, 4, he leaves a whole 3 beats for the natural echo of the resonance of the chord, regardless if on the fortepiano in his time was less than today, that he couldn't know. But even 3, 4, in a very resonant hall, you can still restart at the repeat, reasonably piano. Whenever he goes further into the development, he only has 1 beat of rest between forte and this, compared to the 3, 4. But to have chord in the low register bunched with the injection of the major third leading tone and the 5th, and the resonance, instead of displaying it perhaps chorale like a string quartet, is really to give a punch, like cha! It's much more evocative of a tutti in its generous violence. But that, of course, he doesn't use a chord for that, and purposely so, because when he's having the recapitulation and he goes to the same point, he only has it up an octave. He doesn't do it. So I would suggest for the first chord that goes into the development and is this massive, only naked octave like the second time, but really filled chord with harmonic energy, almost overridden to stay a little longer, to start that mysterious articulation of the not staccato fun, but staccato driven or anxious. As I said, the staccato are not always operatic laugh. Sometimes they're just anxiety staccato. It's almost like project yourself in short breath through the line, but not interrupt in the sense of jumpy or funny. And here it is, staccato. And then, so if you're in a very resonant hall, you won't hear the beginning of a... You have to do, wait a little bit and then start. So are you allowed to do that? Because if you do, then you destroy the structure of the bar numbers by 4, by 8, by 12, and you add a bar, a beat in a bar, you destroy the whole purpose of the form that you serve, since it's a sonata form, the architecture. Well, it's a dilemma. You live with a piece, you discover the piece, you compare it with others who play the piece, you learn, you study, you still love it before, after, differently, it evolves. You record it, you think about it, you check it, you analyze it. Yes, the harmonic progression, the thirds, the chords, the octaves, the ornaments, the delays, the breathing, the surprising altered chords, all these are part of the piece, obviously. How to find their exact placement is easier to say, just play what is written, don't even think about rubato, don't think about extending a pregnancy of the rest in order to have an effect of subito forte in piano, especially if you go from the edges to the center and back, or he has this the escape, but rather, so you want to explore to its fullest in your interpretation all the hints and innuendos and sometimes very forcefully demonstrative effects. It's not just about the contrast forte piano effect, which is the major thing we always think in Beethoven, because it's the sonatas as a core. It's a core repertoire for any pianist, because basically it's the fundamental, the roots for a pianist to play on the piano. Sonatas written for the forte piano, regardless if they're through a string quartet, aria, or other genres that it's evocative of. But then other people did, and other people will, try to figure out that ethical choice between where am I allowed to add more to produce this? Am I want to enhance that effect? Is it just forte piano? Yes, mainly. But I think the contrast of articulations is probably 50% and not less. Or therefore it should be. Therefore, if a sub-detail that might be not as obvious as a forte piano between compared to a difference of detail in the enunciation. Of course, it's part of a group of bars and part of a pulse, part of a tempo. That means of a pace. It's not rigid per se, if not to be metronomic, but it has its large breadth and its subdivided structure, and so it's supposed to make sense of the chaos of nature. If not, it would be, and then you extract. Sometimes he does that with P on the same note. He cannot do that on the piano. I suggest to play perhaps the piano for the one of the two sounds, and the forte for the FP in the other, or the opposite. say, if you're going to do that, what I just did, you better write your own. And when you play his, you play exactly what he wanted. But within that, you can still have the moments where you breathe physiologically, not only metronomically. And then if you feel that the acoustic and but you don't have the right to add a bar. Who are you? Me, meaning. That's what he wrote. And he thought of it. Therefore, I'm not to rewrite it for him or over-characterize it for him or bring better the contrasts than him. He thought of it orchestrally, and I'm supposed to play it orchestrally. Of course, when I have something very intimate with two voices, or compared to the opening, or the two or the second theme, or the innuendo to the second theme. Bass, I have the triplets, I have the thirds, I have the staccati, I have 16th notes, I have broken octaves. I have so many things that are put in such a small amount of time that I want to bring them out for what they are, for what I think they are, like so the staccato there, it's not funny, it's more an interruption that allows to hear the suspended, syncopated descent of the score of this scale. Yeah, not all the articulations are evocative of moods. You can say legato is singing, and of course it is. And if you over legato, say that it's still singing, even if it's a little bit more sleazy singing and it's not articulated clearly, but without air between the notes. And if you want to characterize the four 16th notes, 2 8th notes, forzando, slur and staccato, then they are evocative of something more jumpy and more driven, perhaps more optimistic. I mean, who's to say? If as soon as you put words, you belittle it. I shouldn't continue doing that. I'll just speak in terms of values. When I look at a sunset, I think it's sad is the end of the day. When I see a sunrise, I think it's hope, it's the beginning of the new day. By itself, it's not at all that. It's celestial mechanics at the levels of the cosmos. But to me, it can be meaning that. And so, in a way, I can say that even a staccato could be or could be something like if I do, or am I supposed to over articulate? Am I supposed to overlayer the voices? Am I supposed to recreate the chord from which broken, like the ocean on the rocks of the mountains against which they beat and finally shape after a million years? Perhaps it's too much to say that you bring to a point where he only wrote. So by loving it and zealously perhaps or passionately bringing it out in a way that it means to you as a performer, less as a teacher between the composer and the student. But let's say as a performer you only respond to yourself for your own ethical levels of expectation. And you spend most of your lifetime between playing it and teaching it and recording it thinking about these phenomena which are individually right. They could be in an orchestration already embedded there. All you have to do is just make sure that you traffic organize, like a policeman, the arrival and departures of the instruments. Here you are all the instruments. And even so, a conductor works also a lot in given acoustics to the balances, towards the right balance of the ingredients, which are already embedded in the orchestration itself, but can be fine-tuned according to this conductor or that conductor's opinion of what in each section should be heard, smeared, or really clearly understood. It's very much of a didactical option, because you want to say everything, then the details prevail. You want to not use the details and just fly through the piece and organize the phrase, but you should do both. And I think it takes a lifetime to find the way to bring that merging traffic while the detail. And when you teach, students practice, and then they practice, they repeat, and when they repeat, the slightest innuendo becomes an exaggeration after several months of practice every day, because then you have to always go back to the essential, which is the structure, and work in detail, and then bring the detail in the whole. Oh, so easy to say, sounds almost like easy to say, but it's so difficult to do. And I would say that usually these 16th notes come very fast after the first very static note. But the rest of the half of that bar is as meaningful as the half of the bar that is with music and non-music, as if it was. Then written as a string quartet, and then as a tutti, and as an aria, then as a Bach prelude. That there is something to do with this kind of broken arpeggiation, style brisé. And all these things are part of an organization, the chaos of nature by human wish, and then you organize it with symmetry, or apparently so, with organization of beats that divide in 4 beats the whole thought process. But in fact, that is the notation. When you hear it, it always overboards. You don't hear the bars anymore. So there are the signs, and then there are the notes, and then there are the hints, and then there are the voicing inspirations. Doesn't mean, which sometimes I do to have fun, to voice it in a way that takes off the nature of it. But if you do, he didn't indicate that with stem, so you should embed it in the motion rather than in the emotion of the chord produced by the leap of the 4th, a 6th, an octave. But all this within the 4 beats, if not, it's like on a microscope and you make it so bigger to improve the meaning of these leaps. And you say, oh, I cannot fit them in the same amount of beat, or but it should, because a quarter note is a quarter note, and what unites the first movement of this sonata is the fact that it's in 4/4, and quarter notes based. But the different actions that he undertakes between the characters of the tempi that you want to implement when you do the characters of the themes would possibly bring you in some sections to rush and in some sections to slow down, and that is the least you would do. But if you only want to rigidify it and count loud voice like a robot and say, I'm going to just not allow it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Yes, you will be correct, even if there is a cadenza finally at the end, but in small notes. So he leaves you the room to make a free chromaticism and then start again. But it's not written other than, and then it makes it sound so if you don't re-articulate the downbeat, which makes a gap, but it's part of the understanding of the theme because it doesn't start. Why? So, yes, that's at least because it's empty of bar lines, it's a cadenza, but all the other sections you have tricked with bar lines. What does that to do with? If you start, practice superimpose, yeah. Patterns of the different materials, thematic or passing sections or bridges, you realize that the tectonic plates slightly move, but so little that they can sway in one direction to help you bring the character contrast of a section compared to and it's to do really with a harmonic rhythm. If he has 4 beats for one harmony, or 2 in one bar, or 4 in the same bar, you have to take into account that. It's sort of like the breathing of the texture. Whenever you count the structure and you play the details, and you conduct yourself forward, but you direct yourself. So you have to practice the details before the performance in order to conduct yourself during the performance, and then organize yourself through the eloquence of the different characteristics that you explore, and take into account his indications for the dynamics and the pedaling, and not your taste. Or if you put your taste, you want to organize it so that it becomes part of the thematic material and say, there will be recalls that will remind me of this and there. It's necessary to really sink in the detail in order to forget it, or rather implement it without thinking it. And then what you think is only where you project yourself towards the line end. But the articulation of each character is what determines it more, I think, more than only the contrast of the forte and piano. So, thank you.